Welcome to the Asking Why podcast. I'm your host, Clint Davis, and we are doing part 4 of the Superdome and Hurricane Katrina. For those of you who are just listening for the first time, there are 3 other parts, and I will finish this story out throughout the end of August because it is the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina this year. And I thought, I've gotten to a place through therapy and through my own work that I want to tell the story and show people really that, whatever you go through, whatever trauma you experience, that God can use it for good in His glory. And for me, it really is what set me on a journey to counseling and helping other people. And so I just wanted to kind of boast in this testimony of God and what He did and what we went through. Also, nationally, nobody's really told this story. There's been a few documentaries and some podcasts, but nothing from the perspective of a soldier and somebody who was actually in the Superdome for those days. So here we go. We're going to do part 4. Just as a recap, we got there, day 1. It's not kind of the same. It's my days, but it's not, day 1 of the hurricane. It's more day 1 of my experience. And so that was the day we got activated, had to go down to New Orleans. Day 2, we get there, start loading people into the Superdome. Somewhere around the middle of the night, the storm hits. We spend another day or so in there, locked in. No food, no water. Chaos. Things start to get crazy. Day 4, day 5, we go out and explore and do some things. And so now we're back. We have made it through day 4 or 5, and we have the water is receding, and it's getting crazy. So through the first 3 days of Katrina hit, we had started hearing like lots of reports inside and outside of the dome at this point. And again, I can't confirm or deny every story, but that I've heard. But over the years, I've heard from friends many a tale, and have no reason not to believe them. What I witnessed and am telling you in this story is enough to believe really anything. I remember getting home from New Orleans later on, and my mom telling me, that no one had reported any of these things I had seen, and that no news was actually telling how bad it was. And that was really upsetting because it just felt so crazy and made me feel so crazy. It felt like a cultural gaslight, if you know what that is. And even now when I Google things about Katrina, it says that many of the things were over-exaggerated. And let me tell you, I'm not exaggerating. I thought I was kind of crazy 10 years ago and maybe just making some of this stuff up. But I've done the calls. I've called the soldiers that I'm friends with. I've called the people that were there with me and confirmed all these details so that, I wasn't making anything up or over exaggerating. It's just something that, I feel crazy on. And this is something to really help people understand with trauma. When you go through something this intense, and this day is going to be really intense, which is why I'm prepping this, whether it's abuse or, extreme danger or war or poverty, you can kind of look back and minimize your own experience by either the culture minimizing it, parents minimizing it, telling you it didn't happen that way or couldn't have been that bad or you're being dramatic or whatever. And I just want to encourage people to not do that to themselves, to honor their own experiences and tell their stories and not worry about what everybody else thinks. So anyway, let's get into it. So after spending the day, that we talked about last podcast, traveling to save those who were kind of on death's door, we had spent, the rest of the time pulling security and making it through another dark and dreadful night. I remember having a flashlight and looking in dark rooms. We would go around the Superdome looking and trying to make sure no one was raping anyone or harming anybody. And we would go in these like dark corridors, and there would be people hiding and, and sleeping and doing all sorts of things. And that was really intense and scary. And so that's what we kind of did through the rest of that night. And at this point, I could feel this like dread that this was never going to be over, that we were never going to get out of there, that nobody was coming. And I knew that these people, us included, would never be the same. And I remember having my military Bible that one of my buddies, we called him Ranger Bill, but Bill Pianki, shout out to Bill Pianki. He was a Army Ranger, and he had given it to me a long time ago, I think before I even joined, when I was like a kid, and I kept it forever. It's got the Ranger and Special Forces logo on the front of the Bible. But I had it with me, and I would read Psalm 27 to anyone really who would listen at the time, soldiers and people alike. And so I'm going to just read that passage for everybody. It says, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked advance against me to devour me, it is my enemies and my foes who will stumble and fall. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then I will be confident. One thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple. For the day of trouble, he will keep me safe in his dwelling. He will hide me in a shelter of his sacred tent and set me high on a rock. Then my head will be exalted above the enemies that surround me. I will sing and make music to the Lord. At his sacred tent, I will sacrifice with shouts of joy. Hear my voice when I call, Lord. Be merciful to me and answer me. My heart says of you, seek his face. Your face, Lord, I will seek. Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger. You have been my helper." And it goes on, but at the end it says, "Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord." So this is something that, man, Psalm 27, I used it for passwords. Clint Davis 27 is my old email. Like, I loved this verse because between 9/11, Afghanistan, it was just something that really, in these moments of crisis, helped me. And it seemed like a perfect fit, and really it kept me from completely falling apart while I was there. I knew that God was still good somehow, and that had me, to continue to keep going. I was so chafed. I remember that. I was so sticky. We didn't really know where our equipment was at this point, so we're kind of, getting up the next day, and I just remember thinking, man, I'd love to change clothes, but that just wasn't going to happen. And I was starting to notice at this point, just how bad I smelled, how sticky I was. We started getting reports that the rest of our people, the National Guard troops, were going to start coming in. They're driving down from, down from Alexandria, and that other National Guard and rescue troops had been deployed and should be there within the day. So some helicopters had landed. Some people had been able to get to us with some more information and bring us some radios and comms so that we could, actually get out to the world. Because, a friend of mine was asking me this last week, like, why did it take so long? And it's like, well, think about it. We got there, the hurricane hits, electricity goes out, there's no comms. So that's 2 or 3 days. Well, we had no way to communicate to anybody. So even if we could have communicated, New Orleans is way down South Louisiana. It was going to take the troops, to know that it was going on and know it was a crisis. Well, they had to get together, they had to get equipment, then they had to drive to us. So no matter what, there was at least a day at its fastest point that they could get to us. And that's if they did everything exactly right and as quick as they could, and we told them right when it became a crisis. But we couldn't. And so it took extra time for them to load up gear, for them to go. And then, other states had to get deployment and go through the government and through the state and deploy their troops. And they had to show up with their gear, and then they had to drive down. So no matter what, it just took a while. This is also the day, we had kind of heard that people were coming and that they would be there that day. And we were thankful, but man, we were just too exhausted to really care. Today was also the day where the buses are supposed to come. So we had heard, the water was receding and people could get to us, and everybody was starting to drive down. And someone had, I'm sure the government had organized, or Louisiana had organized greyhounds. And they told us at the time that it was like 50 greyhounds that were supposed to come and get the people and take them away from this like hell on earth, And so we're starting to spread the word throughout the night that in the morning between the Superdome and the New Orleans Arena, people could start to load on the buses. So what we were told is, if you look at an aerial view, and I'm going to link a folder with pictures in the show notes, but if you look at the aerial view, between the Superdome and the New Orleans Arena is a walkway. So there's the Superdome, and then there's this huge walkway, 2 actually, but we blocked one off. One's at an angle and one's straight across. And our plan was to let people line up on the walkway and load through the arena to the highway on the other side. So the buses would stop there, and we would be able to filter the throng of wet, sick, and broken men and women onto these buses out of New Orleans. And we had no clue where they would go or what would happen to them. We had heard about shelters being provided, and we started to get reports of, kind of looters outside the dome, people breaking into everything now that the water was receding, and kind of mass chaos going on. So then we knew we couldn't send them here. So we had no clue where to tell them that these buses were going. At one point, I've heard that there were, snipers that were coming in and picking people off for looting. But I honestly never saw that. I heard some shots, later on tomorrow in the story, but this day I didn't really know any of that. And I didn't run into Chris Kyle, although I heard he was there, who was one of the American snipers from the movie American Sniper. But, I don't know if that's true or not. And so as we kind of go out into the sun the next morning, the sun's rising up. We go out on this walkway, and we had to erect. If you've been to like a fair or you've been to, Mardi Gras parade or any kind of concert, those long metal kind of fences that you can move around that they put just to kind of keep people from getting in places. We had to put these at the end of the bridge to keep people from rushing and forcing their way, onto the buses. You've got the bridge, and then you have the doors to the arena. And so we were trying to limit that. And this walkway is huge. I mean, thousands of fans usually cross it and gather on it to go to the Saints games and go to the arena for fun and merchandise. And now they're going, in misery to try to load on these buses. And so it was going to be, looking back on it, it's interesting, today was going to be kind of I thought about this the other day, our little small battle of Thermopylae, right? Where the 300 Spartans took on King Xerxes and his Persian hordes. That's kind of how I remember it, is that, the reality is that there are thousands and thousands of people who are tunneled and funneled on this bridge. And I know that might seem dramatic, and these people didn't have swords and they weren't trying to kill me. But the looks on their faces, if they could have killed, that definitely would have happened. And if the words could have broken my bones, I would have been undone, because this became a very dramatic, intense situation. As we erect the barriers, we kind of made 2 or 3. We had enough to line the entire thing, so we made these 2 or 3 or 4 makeshift openings where people could slide. You could pull the metal gate back apart from each other and make space for 1 or 2 people to kind of fit through at a time, so that they didn't bum rush us and all go onto the buses. Now, a reminder: this is 6 a.m. in the morning. And we had no clue when the buses would come. But people saw us and immediately started lining up. So I was in charge of one of the gates on the far left, and there were 2 other groups of people down on the far right with openings there as well. I don't remember if there were 2 or 3 gates on that end. And then we had a line of soldiers. My unit was standing behind us. So you've got 2 or 3 people standing at each gate. And then you've got a line of 40 people who are holding the line with their weapons at ready, so these people didn't rush us. And remember, we're all nervous and exhausted. And this was not a docile crowd. This was people who had been in there forever and who had been so stirred up in rage and fear. They had been beaten and they had been threatened and abandoned by society long before, this Katrina had happened. And now they had experienced hell in the Superdome for 3 or 4 days straight. They had lost people. Some of them were dying. They were starving. They were exhausted and dehydrated. They had lost loved ones and literally everything that they owned except the clothes on their back. And they saw us mostly as the enemy, keeping them from leaving. And because of the radio, they saw us as the ones who blew the levees and flooded New Orleans, according to the news. So this is just a frenzy of people who are not looking at us as rescuers or heroes. Most of them are looking at us with hate and rage. So we had tried, I remember trying to explain, you guys need to wait. We don't know when the buses are coming. We'll come and tell you guys when to line up. But they just continued to come. Faces upon faces began to pile up and press against us, and pressing up against the barriers. I mean, just hundreds and hundreds of people. And I remember sensing God so deeply at this moment. I remember thinking, if I don't act lovingly, this is going to go very badly. Now, I had been to Afghanistan. I had dealt with 9/11 deployment and basic, some of those things. And I'd been to therapy and counseling for that. So I understood trauma. I was in school at the time for psychology at Louisiana Tech. And I was very mindful that these people and many of the troops even were in severe fight or flight response. Like everybody was triggered, everybody was dysregulated, and many of these people had tons of problems and mental health issues and addictions. And I could see it in the troops' eyes around me. Like I could see that people were wigging out. And I remember going down the line and starting to comfort my friends and give them some encouragement. And I remember saying, like, this is it, guys. Like, we get them on these buses and we can rest and take a break. Well, so I thought. I turned and, started talking to the crowd at one point. I started asking their names and started encouraging them. And I remember praying and, I tried to speak as much peace as I could as hundreds of people turned into thousands of people. And there are pictures that you can see from an aerial view. It's thousands and thousands of people standing on this bridge. And so I asked their names. I encouraged them. I know looking back now that the Holy Spirit had really taken over. And I remember feeling super calm and in control like I'd never been before. I've experienced this a few times in my life in crisis moments, and many Christians can attest to these kind of stories, but there was just a shift from crisis to calm and controlled. And it felt like all my experiences in martial arts and sports and church and school and the military all zeroed in at this moment, and the Holy Spirit just started working. And on the people came more faces, more bodies, and more sun. It got hotter and hotter as we stood and waited. It was good into 9, 10, 11 o'clock, and no buses had come. And we waited, and still they didn't come. And so after several hours, there were now thousands and thousands of people standing on this bridge, bottlenecked towards us and our tiny metal fences and our loaded machine guns. And this is where I go back to that battle at Thermopylae. Like, it felt like a horde coming down on us with rage and anger and bitterness and desperation. And yep, just like I expected, the crowd, they got angry quickly and aggressive. They were spitting and yelling for us to help them, for us to get them off this bridge. And every hour or so we would scream, like we would have to scream at them to step back and to, let's all count to 3. 1, 2, 3. And everybody take a step back because they were pushing and pinning people and squishing them against the security gates. Women, children, like it was just more than could happen. And it was so hot, people were passing out. There were people with all kinds of medical conditions that were there. People were having heat strokes. And literally they would just have to pick their bodies up and pass them to the back of the line. It was like, a rock concert or, one of those places where there's an outdoor, stadium and everybody's tight and crammed in and celebrating, except for it wasn't fun, right? Nobody was crowd surfing for the right reasons. These were bodies that had passed out. And, it just was insane. Even talking about it, I just feel like it's so crazy. So these sea of faces, right? At this point, they're looking at me with every emotional imaginable. There's dread and despair and rage and disgust and even hope. There were people, not all the people that were bad that were there, they were just wanting to get out of there and trying to just like stay hidden and not be seen and get through the crowd. And so I scanned the crowd and, reminded them to remain calm and to stay with me and not to lose it. I tried to be very encouraging. And it was interesting. The other side of the bridge was not having the same luck. I remember this distinctly. People were jumping over the gate. They were getting hit with the back of the guns. They were being dragged and flexi-cuffed and thrown on the ground. And I remember the troops were screaming at them, and they were trying to dominate them, and I get it. Like, they were trying to fix the situation. They felt disrespected. They had their own issues with how people were treating us and how they were talking to us. But it just became a powder keg. At this point, I remember that it started getting really chaotic, and they were trying to rush through to get into the arena. And it's like, we were telling them that the buses weren't there, but they didn't believe us. And they just wanted in somewhere outside of the sun too. Like, they'd already gotten stuck. They couldn't go back. And if they went back, there's like we left a little walkway on the sides of the bridge so that people could get back to the Superdome. But people did not want to go back in there once they were out. The people started getting so wild and crazy that the line of 40 troops had to lock and load around just to get their attention. And for some, as they see these troops like put around in the chamber, they kind of shrank back. But for others, man, it just emboldened them, and they started threatening us and saying they were going to kill us and take our weapons, and they threatened to overwhelm us and take the weapons for themselves, and they could have done it. So this was the crazy part. It's like, we have these weapons. There's 30 or 40 of us there, but there's 5 to 10,000 people at this point on this bridge waiting in line to get on these buses. It was truly insane. And again, you can look at the pictures. There's actually evidence of this, so I'm not exaggerating. I don't know the exact number, but if you look at the crowd, it's thousands and thousands of people. I don't know if it's 10, but it's insane looking from the aerial view. But during this time, the buses, as it gets crazy, the buses did finally start arriving. And so it becomes time to start loading them on the buses. And I really can't paint a picture for you just how many people were standing in front of me and how many faces were looking at me on that bridge. When I post the picture, if you look in the show notes, I'll circle myself with a pen. I'm a little dot in just an ocean of madness. At first, the plan that we had was to open the gates and let them in, 1 or 2 at a time, maybe 10 or 20. And that went terribly. I would pull the gate back and let a few people through, and dozens of people would try to push. They would knock one another down and stomp on each other. And so I'd have to shut the gate and push them back and scream for them to stop and, for them to back up. And there were teenagers and girls and elderly getting smashed against the ground and on the gates. And, and now look, they weren't innocent. They were smashing people as well. But I just remember feeling this like laser focus that the least of these needed to be taken care of. And I just felt Christ calling me and calming my spirit, which was just this insane supernatural thing that was going on. And as I said, on the other side was pandemonium. Both my peers and the military guys and the citizens, of New Orleans were in constant fighting and arguing. They were smashing and screaming like animals. It was so hot and miserable. People who were getting let through were starting to crowd behind me. That was a major problem, is that they would, we'd let people through, and then they'd want to wait on their family. They'd want to stand back there and go, I'm just waiting on so-and-so. I'm like, no, you can't. Like, you need to go into the arena and get on the buses. And they were just piling up trash. And it was insane. It just brought more chaos to the situation. And so, I had to give orders to the others to send them on without their families and without help. Like, look, you just got to go. If they wanted to wait, they could either wait at the destination for their family, or they had to go back behind the lines of thousands and thousands of people waiting. And so that just really, I hated that. But, some people got lost in the crowd and couldn't find their people, and we didn't really have a choice. Now, this next part, I take a deep breath to tell it. I'm never going to forget this. And I've said this a bunch on the podcast, but I'll never erase this from my memory. As desperation and hope, arose at the same time because the buses were there and they wanted to get out of here, so did the babies. Like, dozens and dozens of babies in diapers started getting passed up to the front and handed for us to hold. Like, people were literally just passing their children, their infants, their toddlers up to the front. Some were desperate to get, the kid out of the fray and out of the crowd. And some wanted to get their child up there so they could skip and get on the buses. Like, they thought, if I can get this baby up there and these troops have them, then they'll let me pass through everybody because that's my baby. And that's what they were trying to do. And I'll never forget looking out at thousands of human faces and seeing these babies being passed up like sacks of potatoes. It was so inhuman and so insane. And I recall seeing several of my buddies holding babies and looking shocked and helpless. Like, they couldn't drop them. These people are just handing them over, and we're holding them, and they're going, what is happening? Like, and the worst part was we had to send them back. We had to like just hand the babies back to these people and say, look, pass this kid back to their mom or dad or whatever. And they're like, we don't know who their dad is or mom is. And I'm like, y'all got to figure it out. And some of them we had to wait and hold, and their parent came through, and they were like, look, you got to go back. Like, you can't just get on the bus. Like, you can't do this. And of course, the people were mad too. Like the people were mad that people were passing their babies and skipping them and trying to get ahead of them. And at this point, it's just life or death, like survival. Nobody cares about anybody else's situation. Nobody cares about the babies. And so I had to start threatening and yelling that if they sent a baby up there, that they would be sent to the back of the line. And so, man, it was just awful. And the miraculous thing was that at some point, and somehow, right, as I was speaking to these thousands and thousands of people, they started to remain calm. At some point in this situation after lunch, the chaos kind of broke on my side of the bridge. I had built trust over several hours with these people by shaking their hands and holding their babies. I mean, I didn't eat or I didn't take a drink of water. I didn't go pee or take a break. And I remember walking the line of thousands of faces, and I smiled and I encouraged and I held firm to boundaries and my faith. And I reminded them, like, hey, look, I've seen you all day. We're in this together, and we are going to get through this together. And I was just telling them over and over, hey, it's almost over. This is it. Like, just like I was telling my troops, like, this is it. You've been here all day. You've made it 6 hours. You just got a little bit left to go. And I could look at them, and eventually I could open the gate, and I would touch each person. Right? I would say, okay, your turn, you, and no one bum rushed. Now, this took supernatural power. And I'll never forget this. I know it sounds dramatic, but like this situation went from pure chaos, pure rage, and it was happening also on the other side of the other side of the bridge. I mean, it was just constant chaos the whole time. But this took something I cannot explain or break down. And it's something that I see sometimes in my counseling office with people in deep pain. It's God's love and trustworthiness for his people, for us, even though we don't deserve it and are incapable of giving it to each other without him. There was this one man in the situation who was taunting me. I remember this. He was standing up on this box in the middle of the crowd, and he was threatening and mocking, and the people were kind of hushing him at this point and saying, leave him alone. Like, he's trying to help us. I remember them saying that. And he was saying he was going to, take me out when he got through the gate. And I thought, I was something else and blah, blah, blah. And, I just remember calmly and coldly telling him that if he wanted to, he could come get it. And if he said one more word, I was going to send him back behind thousands and thousands of people. And I told him that I had been fair and consistent. Like, I was like, bro, I've been fair and consistent. And so, this was just a crazy thing that we had to deal with. And I remember telling him, like, look, guys, if any of you, I'm going to be calm, I'm going to be nice, I'm going to be kind. But if I open this gate and you jump without me touching you, I'm sending you back to the line. And it took one guy to do it. And I had to send him back, and I hated to do it. But he pushed through past this family, and I got the troops to grab him and push him to the back. And that ended it, right? That ended the chaos, that people stopped pushing. They stopped jockeying for position. And I'll never forget, having to choose, you go, tapping couples and families and counting them as they went through the line. I remember at some point there was an Air Force captain who came out with a bullhorn, and he was shouting instructions because it was crazy, right? We had to keep making space for the crowd so they could breathe, because there were just thousands and thousands and thousands of people compressing on top of each other. And this is August in Louisiana, so it's 90 degrees outside. Sun is blazing. It's humid. But again, somehow my entire side of the bridge was calm. And it was literally a complete split. Like, you could see it. Some people were like leaving my section to go to the other section because they thought they could, jump over or break through or kind of push through. And then some were trying to leave their section to come to mine because it was just a lot less chaos. And it was almost like it was split down the middle of the bridge. It was insanity. Now, the reason that it took all day, right? So now we're past lunch, and we're still out there. And the reason that it was taking all day is because there weren't as many buses that were coming as they said. They didn't realize how long it would take to get the buses to us. And they also didn't realize how many people were in the Superdome. And then they didn't realize how long the turnaround would be from taking the buses, picking people up, and then taking them to wherever Mississippi, northern Louisiana, all over Texas, all over the place. So this was the beginning of loading them on the buses all day. We did it all day. At some point in the afternoon, underneath the bridge, someone yelled that someone had shot and had a weapon, had a shotgun, and they had shot at somebody down around the corner. So the bridge runs, there's a street underneath it, and it was, now at this point there was water, but it was low water. And so everybody's freaking out. I remember 6 of us had to move quickly over to the side of the wall. We put our weapons over the side of the wall, waiting for him to come out, and we're just going to light him up. And we could see him moving underneath us, but we couldn't get a clear shot on him. And so he moved under to where we couldn't get a shot. And one of the police officers that was down there he took him out. And then for a while, the crowd got worked up again, and they were freaking out. And it took me a while as they frenzied around to get them back on my side and get them calmed down. But again, I was able to get them calmed down. I was firm. I was fair. I was warm. And as I say this, I hope you know, I'm not bragging. I'm not making this story up so that I look good. I'm telling you this because it was a miracle. Like, it literally was, as I recall it even today, it is such a renewal of my faith that God exists and that he's good and that he was there and he was with me in this moment, and he did a miracle. Was it hell? Absolutely. Was it insane? Absolutely. You bet. Did I spend the next years of my life seeing faces every time I closed my eyes? I did. For months afterwards, and even right now, I can recall the faces of those people. 20 years later, I can see, if I close my eyes, those babies being passed forward. This suffering, this difficulty had consequences, and yet God was there in the moment, was there present, and for whatever reason, used my personality, temperament, and experience to make this less miserable than it had to be, and less miserable for whatever reason than it was for the other guys. And I remember us talking about it, and people will attest to this that were there. Like, it was a night and day difference, my side of the bridge and their side of the bridge. I mean, did it take 6 hours of hell to get there? Yes. But once it was established, the rest of the day, although miserable, there was something crazy and supernatural happening. And so this one day felt like a month. I would get them calm, they'd get worked up again. Then I would choose to go through who would go through and who wouldn't, and they would get mad. And I would try to keep these families together, but it was so hard. But because they would get mixed up in the crowd, and these kids would come out, and there would be no, if they were young, younger kids like 8, 9, 10, and they were by themselves, I would let them stand beside me a minute, and I would try to kind of look in the crowd and find the parent. Where's your mom? Where's your dad? Where are they at? Okay, right there. Okay, y'all, you guys, you're going to be here in a minute. Let them through. And people sometimes just wouldn't let them through. But I would force them to let them through, or I would, get them once they got up there if they were close enough. I remember the way that this happened is that I would make eye contact with somebody for hours on end. Like, I would see them, hundreds of people back in the crowd. And as they would get closer and move closer, I'd continue to reconnect and make eye contact with them again to let them know I saw them, that I wasn't going to forget about them. So by the time they finally made it to me, we'd kind of be like, hey, yeah, good job. You made it. Like, you're about to get through. I would encourage them. And I would see them and go, hey, I know you saw me, and I know I saw you, and they would know I knew it. And they remembered that I stayed connected and didn't lose them in the crowd. And I tried to do this with everybody. And it's insane saying it, because with thousands of people, and as God is my witness, somehow I felt like it worked, and I did that. I know that's impossible. I know that I couldn't have done this, but somehow I did. Right, several of the other guys came down to my gate and were like, hey, how is this going this way? What in the heck are you doing? And I just shrugged and was like, I don't know, dude. Like, just be calm, be loving, connect with them, let them know you're there for them. And that's all I could say. Now, look, I'm not saying it was all rainbows and butterflies. As many of the people who were connected and calm, there were those who were cursing me out, who were spitting on me, and who told me horrible things about myself. But the crowd kind of started to self-regulate and self-control itself. And if people did do those things, they were like literally telling them to shut up, and they would, hit them or throw them to the back. And I would, control that too. But it was a really, really, really crazy situation. I remember this one girl, she was telling me, you're my man. She was so mad. She was, my man's better than you. He at home, and he's more than a man than you. And if he was here, he would kick your butt, yada, yada, yada. And it's kind of funny now. But man, it wasn't then. And so at some point, this is in the afternoon, this is probably 3 or 4 o'clock. At some point during the day, I did get relieved. I remember somebody's like, dude, you got to take a break, because everybody else was switching. But because of the situation with the crowd, and because like I had them in this crazy symbiotic state where they were trusting me and I was trusting them, and I'm telling you, I cannot describe it enough, but there was some way in which it felt like each person, they knew that there was something different going on in this situation. And I just have to call it God. But anyway, they at some point I got a break, and they were like, Davis, you need to go like pee, drink some water or whatever. And I was like, man, I just can't do it. I'd said no a bunch of times, but at this point I'm like, well, look, it's like I got to put the oxygen mask on myself or I can't take care of anybody. So I remember running inside the arena. I went and peed somewhere in a corner because there was no running water at this point. Everything was just, miserable. So I'm sure I found some empty toilet or box of MREs to use the bathroom in, and I shoved some peanut butter. I remember peanut butter and a piece of MRE bread in my mouth, guzzled a bottle of water, and just kind of, oh my gosh, like this is insane. And I remember thinking like, I can't stay in here or I'm going to kind of lose whatever zone I'm in right now. So I stayed about 10 minutes, and then I went back out and took back over. At some point, so this happens the rest of the night, the rest of the afternoon, and at some point, another group of troops from another state had arrived during the break, and we're kind of switching out with people. And I remember the other side of the fence, or the other side of the gate on the bridge, the problem is that the buses weren't coming fast enough. And so they were letting too many people were getting through the gate essentially. And so where we had the barrier to keep us away from the people, now there are people piled up behind us, waiting to get into the door to the arena. And then there's thousands of people in the arena waiting on the buses. So we've got, people coming outside of the Superdome, getting on, just continually throughout this day, staying on the bridge. So the bridge is staying completely full of people waiting to get through the gate that we are 40 of us standing in front of with guns. And then there's 3 of us that are manning each little gate section. And now behind us, there are thousands of people who are waiting to get on the buses, but it's backed up because they didn't have enough buses. And so that was starting to get really sketchy. I mean, there were dogs that were like people had brought. There were dead animals. There were like trash was piling up behind us. And it was like, I felt like I was in between 2 groups now, and I did not like that. The little safety and space we had because of the metal barriers was quickly being eaten up by people behind me that I couldn't see and I couldn't protect myself from. And it was just a mess. And so I remember yelling at our people like, dude, we've got to figure this out. And, we've got to do something about this. Which is, how I felt now after standing with them for 12 hours. They were my people, right? Like I yelled at my people, meaning the crowd. My people I told to trust the system, to trust me. It was kind of this weird, after 3 or 4 days, like I was kind of angry at these people. I was bitter to these people. And then in this moment, it's like, no, this is my group. Like we're going to make it through together. We've been out here all day together. And so, I'll never forget turning around. We're in this moment. There's all these people. I'm trying to calm them down. There's people behind me. I'm feeling kind of like, Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, where the trash compactor is starting to close in on you. And it's like, help me, C-3PO. Like I need somebody to help me. And who was C-3PO? But I turn around and I see this 1-star general. And he's walking behind the line of our troops, and we're Alpha Company 527s. And he was doing nothing but looking. Like they had just gotten there, I guess. Like they had pulled up in trucks, and they had, he's just assessing the situation. And so I run up to him, and I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Like, why don't you freaking do something? And I didn't say freaking, I'm sure. You have all the power in the world. Like, you're a 1-star general. Like, go in there and get these guys out of here. Do something. Get us organized. Like, these people are literally dying out here, and we're getting backed up like crazy. Do something. And I remember he looked at me with the strangest look on his face and said, "Okay, Sergeant." And he moved off, quickly. And now looking back, I'm sure he had never been spoken to like this. And but I'd been in 5 days of hell, and I didn't care who he was or what his rank was. But I do remember his uniform being clean and pressed, and mine smelled like blood and pee, And so I did not care. And I remember one of my friends being like, "Dude, that was a 1-star general." I was like, "I don't care who he is. Like, somebody's got to do something before this whole thing collapses. It's already on the brink." And we've held it for, 12, 13 hours at this point. And where did he come from? Like, at this point, like, all we knew were the 200 guys and girls that were there. And now apparently there are all these other people who have gotten there. And here we are on this bridge that we've been on for 12 or 13 hours in pure hell in the sun, miserable, and there are other people here who can help. And why are they not doing something? Why are they walking around like, "Oh, this is just like not a big deal and we're not in a crisis?" So I spin back around to the crowd, continue my work. And the truth is, I never saw that general again. But something started to happen inside, and the crowd that was waiting and pressing us from all sides started to move. And I remember being able to breathe again, and the people started getting out from behind us, and we were kind of able to get back to our normal system where I would open the gate and I would look people in the face that I'd been looking at for hours and hours on end, and I'd say, you, and I'd gently touch them, you, and they'd walk through the gate and they'd go get in line. And that was just something that I'll never forget. Now at this point, the sun starts to go down and it's getting darker, and there's still just as many people to be helped as there were at 6 a.m. Never once this entire time was there a break in this work. Was there a moment of respite? Every second of every moment was life or death or chaos for somebody. Several people, right, like I said, had taken a break and gotten relief, but I just could not leave. I couldn't leave these people. At one point, I remember this lady came up to the gate, and she had recently had open heart surgery. And I remember her stitches were coming apart, and I could see into her chest cavity. Another guy was shaking so hard because he was saying, "I need my insulin shot," but nobody would help him. And so I remember bending down and helping him do that. It was always something. And then there was zero medical care. On that bridge that day, there was zero care for anybody. There was no aid at all. There was no water and no food all day for these people. And they and I and us were miserable. Luckily, I could say when they complained, "Have you seen me drink water? Have you seen me eat anything? Have you seen me take a break?" And this is, I think, one of the things that, built rapport over time, is that, just staying engaged, staying connected, and being in misery with them, and just reminding them, like, "Look, dude, like, you've literally been looking at me for 5 hours. I've watched you for 6 hours move closer and closer to this gate. I haven't moved. I haven't done anything. Like, chill." And I said this off and on that whole day. It was a 12 to 14 hour day, and they believed me, and their eyes didn't lie, and I tried not to either. So as we load these people on the buses, there had been a man out there all day, and somehow he had got disconnected from his family, and he got through the gate but could not, stand there. That was the rule. And so I was like, "Man, you got to either get on the bus without your family, or you got to go back into the mass and find them." And I'll remember the look on his face, and he said to me, "I can't abandon my family." And he turned and kind of went into the crowd, back into the line to find them. And I tell that story because I want you to know that not all these people were mean. Not all these people were evil. People were scared. They were put in this worst situation imaginable, and they couldn't think, they couldn't function, and neither could a lot of us, honestly. Everyone was exhausted, dehydrated, and in panic mode for the most part. And I can't imagine that any group of people put in this situation would have acted any different. It doesn't matter what culture it is, what ethnicity is. People put in crisis, get in fight or flight, they get in survival, their animal brain, their right brain takes over, their emotions take over, and they act like animals because they have been treated like animals. But I want to remind you that many of them acted with love and respect and thankfulness. Now, with thousands and thousands of people, that statistic was pretty low. But people did. They were kind. They thanked us. They shook our hands. Many of them did do this, although the numbers and the ratio was pretty small. So at around 8 a.m. or p.m., an entire unit came walking up that had just arrived. Like they had literally just pulled up and were here to take over and relieve us. So we're here for 4 or 5 days in hell, and these guys drive up in their trucks and they're ready to go. They're fresh. They got their uniforms on, their clean uniforms on. They've traveled. I think there was an Oklahoma National Guard unit that had been activated. And I remember not wanting to leave. I remember that many of the people had been watching and waiting to be let through the gate. And I had built trust with them. I had seen their faces. I'd showed them loving kindness. I had their trust, and they knew it. But I was done. My time with them was at an end, and I remember standing alone in front of them, and I got their attention. I was like, hey, y'all listen up. And I told them, I was like, I got to go. Like, I've got to walk away. I've got to end this. I told them it was an honor to help them and serve them, and that these guys were here to help. And I'll never forget, another one of my buddies was reminding me of this. I'll never forget, like when I told them I've got to go and I was going to step away, there was literally an audible groan, and people were crying and being like, no, don't leave us. Like, we don't trust them. Like, they're not going to let us through. You've seen me, blah, blah, blah. And so it made me so proud, but so heartbroken at the same time. And I remember walking away, and this E6 came up, this African-American guy. I remember his face right now. And he started pulling rank. He was like, just being kind of formal and uptight and telling me what to do. And Sergeant, what is this? And where are we supposed to be doing? And just talking to me poorly. He didn't know what was going on. He wasn't there the last 5 days. He had no clue. And he just started bossing us around and it told me, he said, hey man, we brought these cases of water. And he literally asked me and the other 4 guys standing there if we could go get them and bring them up to them. If I could take my guys who have been through hell on earth, and if I could get water for them out of their trucks and bring it back to them while they got organized. Now, this is all a blur, but I remember, much like the guy in the wheelchair on the truck, I thought, should I punch this dude in the face or just do what he's asking? And there were so many moments like this. But I looked at several of my friends, and they were like, forget this dude. Several of them started talking trash, and they were walking off cussing, and they left. And I said, I remember telling the guy, I got you, Sarge. And I thought that was a much better reply looking back. But again, I think it had to be the Lord. I walked down this long ramp to the bottom of the bridge, and I look up to see that the cavalry has arrived. Like I remember walking down the bridge, looking up, and there were like dozens of trucks and vehicles that have gotten there to relieve us. This must have been happening all day, but we were so glued in on the situation that we were, right? We were so used to being isolated and alone, but there were people that were there, and they were loaded down with MREs and water and food and blankets and all kinds of stuff, which I don't know why you need blankets in August, but that's a whole nother issue of, When Helping Hurts. It's a great book if you haven't read it. I think I justified going and getting the water for this dude because I knew the people in the crowd would get some of it. And so I didn't do it for this mindless sergeant unaware of the, insanity of the request he made. I did it for those people who hadn't had a drink the entire day. And so I saw my buddies walk off. I started unloading these cases, and I remember I grabbed 3 or 4 of them and I walked them up there. And as I came around the corner, madness was ensuing. The troops were bashing people and yelling and yanking people. Remember, immediately as I came up, they grabbed this guy and pulled him over the thing and threw him on the ground and flexi-cuffed him, and they were all yelling, and I couldn't believe it. I'd spent all day cultivating this relationship, trying to make this crazy situation calm. The Lord was working through me, and I felt like it was just this miraculous thing happening. And all I could do was shake my head and turn around. I couldn't even look at anybody or anything. I just put my head down and just walked back to the Superdome. I did take the cases of water and sling them down towards the troops, though. I was just disgusted and disappointed and so helpless. I had nothing left in the gas tank to go and argue or lecture them or teach them. And for whatever reason, I was done. So I thought. So as I walk back to the dome, right, I catch up with my buddies who were on the line with me, and they start telling me about how we got news that we're going to get our stuff and move out of the dome. And I'm like, holy crap, really? And Sergeant Knight, he's like, yeah, we gotta go find our duffel bags and gear, though. And so we were moving from the Superdome where we had our stuff, which is moving into the car garage that was attached to the dome. If you've ever been to the Saints game, or probably any football stadium, it's always the car garage that's attached right next to the football stadium where you can park and walk over. And the first floor was underwater still, but the third and fourth floors were open. And so at this point, I started getting really delirious. I'm exhausted. We had been out there for 14 hours, and yet we're walking trying to find our bags. We're in this like huge gaggle of people, and I remember we had to run up, and some genius had moved all of our stuff up to like the 6th or 7th floor because we didn't want it to get wet and the water was rising down in where we used to have it. And so the bad news is that our first sergeant and even Sergeant Knight, they're leading us, but they had no clue where we were going. And the bad news for me was I had 2 duffel bags. We all did, most of us, but I had 2 duffel bags that I brought. So these are huge, like army green duffel bags with personal gear, with books and stuff that you need for like a deployment, and then one with all your military stuff, your rucksack and your sleeping stuff, and then your clothes. And then I had my AR and some ammo. So it was heavy. And as we start walking down the stairs and down these escalators that are not moving, we get to the bottom and we realize that the floor, so we have to go to the bottom to make it around the Superdome to get to the car garage because we're on the other side. And the floor was so disgusting and wet and covered with filth that we couldn't stop to put our bags down. So we're just like carrying these bags and we can't take a break. And I look up and I don't want to hate on this, but it's just the reality. There was a sergeant who did not have any gear. She was walking by herself, and a couple of troops were carrying her stuff and her weapon. And I just remember starting to laugh at the pure insanity of the situation. I started, to probably cry a little bit at the pure insanity of it. We were trying to leave the dome, and we can't even find our way out. We've been stuck in this place, and now we're trying to leave, and we're being led in the wrong direction. We're being led by people who have not been with us on that bridge, who have been doing something else. I'm sure, like, here's the deal. I remember getting really frustrated at this point, looking at this person and being so mad and kind of losing my mind a little bit. But I don't know what he or she was doing. Like, I don't know what anybody else was doing while we were doing this. And I'm sure they have horror stories as well. So all I'm telling this version of my story, it's the only thing that I saw. I have no clue what anybody else was going through at any given moment. And it was probably a lot of the same hell. So just because she wasn't carrying her bags or a weapon, I don't want to judge her. She might have been injured. She might have been, overheated. I mean, there could have been a lot of things. I just remember that kind of breaking me of like feeling so alone and isolated and like nobody knew what was really going on for us. So every turn we took to get outside of the bottom of the dome was locked or barricaded. And we're passing people who have not gotten onto the buses, and they are cursing us out. They're yelling at us, telling us that we're abandoning them. Where are y'all going? Why are you leaving us? Y'all are going home and y'all are going to leave us to die. They're calling us racist and chickens and all manner of deplorable words. After all we had done and all we had been through, it was just too much. And I remember I started feeling something crack inside my brain. I was exhausted, carrying these bags. I can't put them down because it's so muddy and nasty, and the floor's filled with poop and blood, I'm sure. And so I start singing this silly cadence. I start when you march in the military, the drill instructor usually sings a part of it and you respond to it. And so I just start making up this silly song as we're walking through, and I'm sure I'm making fun of the first sergeant. I'm making fun of one of my other sergeant friends. I'm making fun of myself for joining the guard. I'm making fun of whatever silliness and craziness I can distract myself and everyone around me from the pain in my shoulders and my legs and really my broken heart probably. And then I hear my friends start to echo it back to me. and I make up another line, another verse. And so we're going back and forth, and I'm sure it's very colorful language. But I was kind of in hysterics at this point, and I'm carrying my gear and trying not to lose my mind. And I just remember that being like such a typical thing for our unit, was just we loved to joke and kind of bust each other's chops and make fun. And I just remember something taking over me and just about to crack. Eventually we round the corner and get to where we're going, and it's like a shining light. We see the ramp to the side of the dome where the car garage is. We walk over, and cots are already being set up for us. There's a picture where somebody took up underneath it. And I'll never forget, and I know I say this all the time, but it's true. I'll never forget walking over to see Sergeant Prater, who is a good friend of mine, who I'd done a lot of the security with. He's got a cot, and so I just dropped my gear next to him, and I dropped my bags. And I remember him being like, man, we don't have any water. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I literally don't have anything left. So I drop my bags. I walk as fast as I can. And I remember there just being so much adrenaline. I'm sure so much cortisol pumping through me. I go back down the ramp. I grab literally 3 cases of water and carry them back over, drop them down next to our cot. And I just collapsed kind of on the cot. Now, at this point, we didn't know where anyone was either. It was dark. It was hot. We couldn't see our friends. The leadership wasn't around. So someone, I don't remember who, was just like, look, you guys are done. Just rest. We'll figure it all out tomorrow, because it's 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. I have no clue what time it is. So for the first time in 5 days, I sit down on this cot. There are no other human beings around me except for military guys. And I start to be able to take my jacket off, my BDU jacket. I start to unlace my boots. And let me tell you how good this feels and how awful it felt. Soaking wet. Or my arms were like crusted up. My shoulders were crusty and wet at the same time. It was so sticky, not to mention everywhere else. And I remember stripping everything off, and I laid down on this cot in my boxer briefs. That's it. It was so gross and sticky. And I closed my eyes to go to sleep. And right as I started to drift off into dream world, I felt a hand on my shoulder. And this gruff voice that I knew very well, he goes, Davis? So I cracked my eyes open, and it was Sergeant Prater. And he looked at me and he goes, man, that's how he kind of said it, we got to pull guard duty. And as I cracked one eye open, he had a pair of night vision goggles in one hand and his Kevlar and a weapon in the other. And I didn't move. And he said, man, people have been climbing up here on the garage and coming in here trying to take our food and weapons and gear. And so they've asked some of us, we've got to figure it out. There have been a few fights and stuff during the day. See, what I didn't know is while we were loading people on the buses, there were units coming in and changing guard duty. And they had spent the day planning and coming up with systems of taking an assessment of what was going on. So the bigwigs were there now, and they were doing what they do, coming up with stupid jobs and stupid rules to cover their butts and go and play by the book, right? So if you don't know this, in the Army, there's a lot of rules that you have to do, a lot of things you have to do. You have to go around in circles when you could just go on a straight line because of red tape. And so these people had come in on day 5 experiencing none of what we'd experienced, and they're just doing the traditional National Guard Army stuff. They just have the rules and the protocols. And so guard duty with night vision goggles was one of those things. So I sat up and I put my head in my hands. Now my duffel bag was somewhere around in the dark, and I had clean clothes in there, and boy were they calling my name. But we did not have time to get them. Security was more important than comfort, as usual. And this was it. This was a moment that I almost lost it for real. Because I had to sit back down, and I had to put my nasty, wet, smelly BDUs and boots back on. I remember getting my wet socks, getting my pants on, getting my boots on. But when I had to put my shirt and my top back on, for some reason I couldn't do it. I mean, the sensory feeling and the smell was just too much. And I remember sitting there and thinking, you're either going to blow up and freak out and cuss everyone out, or you're going to shut up and you're going to do what your friend is asking you to do. I remember taking a deep breath. I put my top on. I put my Kevlar back on, got my night vision goggles, and I went to pull security. And I remember asking Prater a few years ago, I was writing this story down and trying to remember it all. And I said, dude, why, bro? Why did you come and pick me to help you? And he said in his traditional, man, I knew you were either going to flip out and cuss everybody out and tell them to F off and we ain't doing this, or you were just going to come with me and get it done. And that's literally what I was thinking, because I'm going to be honest, when I was in the Army, I never had like a respect for rank. I had a respect for people. And so if something was stupid, I was going to say it better for worse. But so that's what happened. After 14 hours of the worst day of my life, me and Sergeant Prater waited in the dark to shoot people if they came over the edge of the building. Like we had to literally set it up in the dark, night vision goggles on, waiting to see if people were sneaking in to harm anybody or to do anything. And our orders were, you just take them out. You threaten them and tell them to go away. And if they keep coming, you take them out. Now, by God's grace, we pulled 3 hours of duty without any problems. Thank God. Like I remember having to yell at people, but I never had to pull the trigger. And I don't think I would have, honestly. I felt like God was so present, like I would have been justified, but there were other options. Now, I will say what I did have to do was repeatedly have to go and kick Prater awake. I drew this little picture of this like 10 years ago, but there was a pillar and I remember he was posted up on it, and shout out to you, Prater. I know, look, I'm not hating on you for falling asleep, but I just remember this being so funny. He was posted up on this pillar, and I would have my night vision goggles on, and I would be looking and, making sure nobody's coming in. And then I would scan over, and he'd just be head back, sawing logs. He was snoozing. And so I'd walk over and I'd just kick the crap out of him. Like, dude, wake up. You woke me up. You got me out here. You're going to stay awake with me. And I remember he would just laugh, and I'd walk off and scan for the intruders again. And I'd scan back over. He'd be I'd hear him usually if I was close enough. He used to snore so bad. Anybody who was in the military with us knows like a freight train, right? And so anyway, after 3 hours, we finally get back to our cots and fall asleep. I don't really recall what happened. I just remember I got out of those BDUs again as fast as I could and crashed out. And I do remember at first I was kind of panicking. I remember I didn't trust whoever was pulling security, and so we were up there by ourselves in the pitch black. And I just remember thinking, man, I hope whoever's pulling security isn't sleeping like Prater. And also, like, I remember I couldn't find a place to rest my my arms because they were so sticky and wet. Like I wanted to put them over my face, but they were so disgusting and smelly. And I wanted to put them by my sides, but my skin on skin was so wet and nasty that I couldn't do that. Thankfully, I was so exhausted that after a few moments of panic, I just passed out. And so that ends that day. This ends part 2 and day 5 of my time in the Superdome, and it was a wild one. The next couple of days brings its own adventures, which we'll get to as we try to figure out what has just happened. How are we supposed to pull security? We realize that the chaos and danger is not just in the Superdome, but it's in the hospitals and the streets of New Orleans. And so the looting had begun, and new chaos was about to ensue. So thanks for listening. Tune in next week for part 5.